Starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where we find you today. This morning we have Dr. Lisa Ferguson presenting her fifth webinar in her 0 to 60 series titled Introduction to Strategy. But before we get to that today, I do have some announcements regarding conference coming up in June. We do have registrations still available for the conference, but we are down to only 87 standard rooms left, and suite rooms are completely sold out. So if you're planning to attend, I would suggest getting on the website right away and go ahead and register for a room. And speaking of conference, we are also going to be announcing our conference program later this week. It has finally been finalized, so we'll be getting that up on the website, and so you can go ahead and look at that before you register to see if you'd like to attend one of our or multiples of our great events coming up during the conference. Also coming up in March, we have our next webinar with Ellie Schregenheim, which is his discussing the boundaries of CCPM, and that's on March 2nd. And then on March 4th, we have Debbie Roberts presenting her webinar titled Mindsets, How TOC Extends Dweck's Original Work. So go ahead and, if you haven't already, register for those webinars coming up in March. So with that, I'll get back to the webinar for today. We have Dr. Lisa Ferguson presenting her webinar, so we'll go ahead and give the mic and everything over to her. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Welcome, everyone. This is, as she mentioned, the fifth in my series of 0 to 60 Introduction to the Functional Applications of TOC in Business or Organizations. And just to let you know, the sequence did change somewhat, and there are various reasons for that, which will be discussed briefly later in this seminar with an example that addresses strategy. So when you look at any organization, whether it be for-profit or not-for-profit, government, etc., small business, they have to put in place what is their strategy, what is their goal that they want to achieve, and then create a strategic plan and then execute to that plan in order to achieve their goal. And the focus then is, it's important to understand that you need to be effective in planning, but you also need to understand that reality is never going to turn out exactly as you expected, that unusual events are happening all the time, and you can try to plan for different possibilities, but Murphy is alive and well. Murphy's law, as you may have heard, is if anything can go wrong, it will. So you need to have, try to come up with a great plan, but then be able to know how to adjust it effectively in order to achieve what your purpose of your organization is, a vision for it. So we need to talk about what the goal and necessary conditions are for an organization. And most times people will focus, especially when they're talking about for-profit organizations, on make money now as well as in the future. And this was discussed in the best-selling novel The Goal by Dr. Ellie Goldratt, the founder of TOC, is what is the goal and what are the necessary conditions required for achieving that goal. Well, if you think about it, an organization has a purpose. How does it make money? And even if it's not for profit, it still has to have money coming in to support its work, its purpose. Is what we need to do is provide satisfaction to the market now as well as in the future. So the customers, who are we trying to provide a product or service to, we need to meet their needs. And that's how we make money. But that's not a sufficient condition for making money. You have to satisfy the market, but you also have to provide a secure and satisfying environment to employees now as well as in the future. Because think about it, especially for service organizations, we directly interact with those employees, and how they treat us and how effective they are at their jobs affects how satisfied we are as customers. So actually this goal and necessary conditions are really, all three of them must be achieved for an organization to be successful. And you could set one as the goal, but my current view on strategy is really that the goal or the top level strategy of the organization has to be about achieving all three of these, because they are what I would refer to as different identicals. And that was a term that Ellie Goldratt came up with to talk about something from when he studied philosophy is they're different, but they're the same. In other words, you think of somebody's face and say, well, there's a nose and the eyes and the mouth. These are all components of the face, but they all have to come together to be part of the face. They are interrelated, but they're different views of the face. So we have to achieve all three of these. I mean, think about the environment for employees. If you have high turnover, it costs money to hire and train new employees to do a great job, or you may not even be able to get employees if you're not providing a secure and satisfying environment. So now the question is, how do we achieve these? So what I did as I prepared this presentation today is I was thinking about how do I explain what the current view in TOC is with respect to strategy? Because TOC was first developed, over 30 years ago, and Ellie's goal in life was to teach the world to think. And so he developed TOC, or the theory of constraints, as a way of achieving that. And so since then, TOC has been the TOC knowledge base and applications and experience in applying various tools of how to think critically has been growing exponentially, that now it's difficult to find one person who really has great knowledge across all fields of TOC. Now, with respect to strategy, there are four components here, four pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, which is how to achieve effectively the strategy or goal of your organization. Now, on the top, I have abbreviations here. The TSTT stands for the Transformational Strategy and Tactic Tree. Now, the Transformational Strategy and Tactic Tree is the tool that provides all the logic and plan for how to transform the organization into the vision that was created for it, or if it's another way to view it is how to transform its current reality into its desired future reality. Next, on the right, we have the Organizational Strategy and Tactic Tree, and this is for giving specific guidance to the different types of employees of the organization, different levels of the organization in terms of what do they specifically need to do to achieve the plan that was set out in the Transformational Strategy and Tactic Tree. And these two trees need to be used together to achieve the goal, as well as the other two on the bottom. One is called the 4 viewpoints of change, and years ago Ellie Goldratt spoke about the different ways in which to view change, like what is preventing us from changing or motivating us to change. He talked about the mermaid, the alligator, the pot of gold, etc. So I'll briefly talk about those here. And then the lieutenant's cloud, which is the lieutenant is the person who's at various levels of the organization that's charged with actually implementing the plan, is that they can be put into a conflict when fires happen, when the unexpected Murphy arises, and how to deal with that. So all four of these components are necessary and sufficient for effectively, actually very effectively, dramatically achieving the goal of the organization, making huge progress toward it. So now let's take a look at each of these. I want to start with the 4 viewpoints of change, and just to point out to you that I have about an hour to explain this content to you, to provide an introduction to strategy. So I'm providing an introduction to each of these 4 components, but it's not going to be comprehensive and a detailed explanation, but just an introduction, and at the end of my talk I'll guide you to where you can learn more about these different components. So the four viewpoints of change. You may recall that William Shakespeare, a talented author, had a quote that's similar to the one that I wrote here, which is, to change or not to change? That is the question. So reality is changing, and it's actually changing, in my opinion, almost have an exponential growth in the level of change happening in the world with technology, with so many different areas of life. And so then the question for you or for your organization is, are you going to change? Are you going to change, hopefully, for the better, to make a difference? And even one person can make a difference in this world, as we've seen from history. So let's briefly talk about what the four viewpoints are. As I mentioned earlier, Ellie started talking many years ago, about the alligator, the mermaid, the pot of gold, and what we now refer to as crutches. Is the alligator is, you're in a situation, here you are thinking, should I change or not? Or should my organization change or not? And one or more of these are going to affect your decision about change and whether or not you do it effectively or even move forward on it. So all four of these are actually important, but at different times one can be more important than the other, and one can be more of a motivator than another. So for example, let's start with the alligator. The alligator is the current reality, is what the situation is in your life or in your organization that is undesirable. So the fact that you're putting out a lot of fires, or you're not having the financial freedom that you'd like to have in life as an organization to do what you want to do, or as a person to achieve your goal in life or to have a high quality of life. It's what's the problem is the alligator is there ready to bite you. It's all the symptoms about what is wrong with your current reality. On the other side, though, we have the mermaid. There are certain things that are desirable about your current reality, things that you like about your life or that's good in your organization. Maybe you have a great family environment, a supportive environment of loyalty and people working together to achieve win-win for all. And so that is a great thing. Then we have the pot of gold, and that is what we wish to have in the future, this amazing vision of what can be achieved in our life and our organization. Maybe you would have a vision of being a best-selling author, or for an organization to touch the lives of millions through teaching critical thinking skills, or how to achieve win-win, or whatever it is. Some amazing vision of what you would like to achieve in your life is the pot of gold. And then we have the crutches, is what could happen if we try to make our wish come true. So if we actually do strive toward achieving this amazing vision of the future reality of what we'd like it to be, we could break our legs on the way climbing that cliff to reach that vision, because it's not an easy path. But I can tell you this, that for several decades, the tools and applications of TOC have achieved dramatic results for improving performance and improving the ability of an organization or a person to achieve their goal or to have a higher quality of life. And unfortunately, not as many people are aware of it as could be. And hopefully, with the efforts that many of us are doing, it will become more aware. More people will become aware of the wonderful reality and set of knowledge that Ellie started, and many of us have contributed to and are continuing forward with the torch to honor his legacy, to make the world a better place, as he would put it, to put the light back into the eyes of the people, so that the time that you spend at work or with your family or alone is actually quality time, that you have a meaningful life, that you're not suffering. So now, let's talk about the second of the 4 components to have an effective strategy, to effectively achieve the strategy of the organization, the transformational strategy and tactic trees. Before I move on to this, I just want to point out the 4 views of change. There's been a lot more work on presenting ideas with respect to those in the past 2 to 3 years. So there are conference presentations from TOC-ICO that actually give examples of how to apply the process of looking at the 4 views of change and figuring out then how to effectively drive and motivate change. Now, the transformational strategy and tactic trees, or actually it used to be called years ago just a strategy and tactic tree. And in 2009, when Ellie presented at the TOC-ICO International Conference in Tokyo, Japan, he pointed out that there are actually 3 types of strategy and tactics trees. Perhaps there's more. But in the discussion that I had with Ellie there, I said, I think that once we have names for them, that this one, which is the one that we've been working with and have the most experience with, is should be called the transformational strategy and tactic tree. And so this is the tool that actually Ellie in 1985 came to the vision and reality of an application of starting to use strategy and tactic trees. For those of you who know anything about TOC or you start to learn about it, the thinking processes were actually developed after the strategy and tactic tree. This was a tool that combines both necessity-based logic and sufficiency-based logic. And at that time, he was unable to teach anyone else how to write this type of strategy and tactic tree, this tool. So he put it on the shelf, and because it couldn't be just dependent on one person, him, and decided years later to take it off the shelf at the encouragement of one of his colleagues and friends, Oded Cohen, who is head of Goldrat Schools and has done wonderful work with TOC and has written some books, who I've had the pleasure of working with, an honor. And so the strategy and tactic tree was pulled off the shelf, I don't know exactly when it was, mid-2000s, and started being used by Goldrat Group because at that time we were doing cross-functional synchronized implementations of TOC, not just the TOC production solution or project management solution, which I already provided introductions for in this 0 to 60 series, or even the distribution solution, which were each developed and applied over the years as the knowledge of TOC developed and the areas in which it delved into extended, that Ellie brought it off the shelf because he realized it was needed in order to help us more effectively implement the change. And so then he started teaching people how to write this type of strategy and tactic tree, and I had the honor of being, I think it was the 4th or 5th person that he trained and certified in having the ability to write this type of strategy and tactic tree. So how did he come up with this? He was thinking about how do you define strategy and tactic, because he understood, one of the people he admired and followed in terms of what was done historically was Einstein. And Albert Einstein, when he came up with this theory of relativity, and here's a little animation to represent Einstein, he had to start to develop his theory. He needed a definition of time. And it was like, what do I do? He looked in the literature, what did the philosophers say, or even, I guess, the dictionary, what's the definition of time? And nothing worked for him, and there was no agreement on what was time. But he needed a definition to develop his theory, so he came up with this definition. Time is what is measured by a clock. Kind of, wow, strange, but it actually worked to enable him to develop his theory of relativity. So Ellie realized, like he was standing on the shoulders of a giant, such as Einstein, that to build on what he did to develop a strategic planning and execution tool, he needed to find strategy and tactics. So he came up with these two definitions. Strategy is the answer to the question, what for? Why are we taking this action? What are we trying to achieve? What's the objective? And tactic is the answer to the question, how? How do we do it? How do we specifically achieve whatever strategy that we've set for the organization? So then, as I was working with Goldrat Group, I became a faculty member of Goldrat Schools and Goldrat Consulting for training TOC experts and supply chain logistics implementation experts. We started using the transformational strategy and tactic tree to achieve viable visions. And viable vision, its definition changed over time, but basically it's now defined as how does a company or an organization become ever flourishing? How do we achieve those three, the goal and the necessary conditions, or the different identicals for the organization being success, so satisfying the market, the employees, and making money. So Ellie developed strategy and tactic trees, transformational strategy and tactic trees for different types of organizations. And about 5 of those or more have been released in the public domain and have been there for some time. They're actually available on the TOC-ICO website. And so one of those was the retailer strategy and tactic tree, which I worked on with him when I was his apprentice in 2007 to 2008. So what I did was, in 2008, I passed all of Ellie's writing tests because I had asked him to teach me how to write. And then for the past several years, I've been teaching and mentoring others in how to write transformational strategy and tactics trees. And so I came to this realization that for the strategy of the viable vision organizations, which actually Goldrat Group was focused on and still is, mainly focused on physical product organizations, which is manufacturing companies selling to other manufacturers or selling through the supply chain to retailers, etc. So organizations that have something to do with producing or selling a physical product. So what we needed to understand was, with respect to achieving the strategy of the organization, what is the conflict, the root cause that is preventing organizations from becoming ever flourishing? Which is, here A is the common objective or goal. This is a conflict cloud or evaporating cloud, one of the thinking process tools of TOC. So the objective is, for a viable vision organization, is to become ever flourishing, which means, and the asterisk here says, continuously and significantly increasing value to all stakeholders, employees, including suppliers, clients, and shareholders, etc. In order to become ever flourishing, an ever-flourishing organization, we must grow profits and sales exponentially year after year. So that's what Ellie referred to as the red curve in presentations he started giving, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. I'm not sure exactly when that came out from my memory, but exponential growth. And any company that's publicly traded has to grow at some rate, which is exponentially, 5% growth per year, 10%, whatever is expected to be doing well in that industry, or, for a public trade company. So you have to keep growing profits and sales, and it can get harder over time when you're a really large company, like a Fortune 500 company or Fortune 100. How do you keep growing your profits and sales exponentially year after year? Well, in order to do that, you generally have to take risky actions. Do some things, maybe buy companies that you're not sure about, or do other things. On the other side, the conflict is, in order to become an ever-flourishing company, we must maintain stability, which is what Ellie referred to as the green curve. And he called them the red and green curve because those were the color markers he was using when he first described them. But the green curve is about stability. Stability of the organization, it must be stable for future success. I mean, you think about in the book Built to Last, which presented some great research by some professors about companies that have been built to last, that have been around for over 50 years, are considered the gold medalist, the top, the #1 company in their industry. Those companies have exhibited exponential growth in profits and sales. And at the same time, they had to maintain stability. If you think about a company that's been around for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, it had to be a stable environment that they were able to adapt to the changing reality in order to continue to maintain their success. And the stability is also important for their employees, to be loyal to your employees, support them, and provide a great environment for them. So in order to maintain stability, we need to take conservative actions. Don't take the big risks, like building a multi-million-dollar plant when you don't know you're going to have the capacity to sell all the products that would be produced from there. And so then D and D prime are the actions that are the ones that are in conflict. You can't take risky actions and conservative actions at the same time. And then B and C are both the necessary conditions or requirements for becoming an ever-flourishing company. So in the transformational strategy and tactic trees, the realization was, how do we break this conflict? How do we find a way to achieve A, B, and C without doing D and D prime? Or what is the solution? Which one do we get rid of, or do we do something in between, a compromise? Really, a compromise is win-lose. Always win-lose deteriorates to lose-lose. So we have to find a way to be win-win for all, and that means not just all the shareholders in your organization or stakeholders, everyone who has a stake in the organization, but even organizations in the same supply chain have to be enabling win-win for all, because if your supplier goes under, what are you going to do? So it turns out that in the book The Choice, which was the book that Ellie wrote during my year that I was his apprentice, he explained win-win and his philosophy of life, that at that stage, which I think it was actually published in 2008, he had expanded his vision and understanding of TOC beyond a management philosophy, which was the primary focus back then, to a philosophy of life, which his goal was to teach the world to think critically, or teach the world to think is, it didn't have to just apply to business. There were applications in health and education, etc., and even personal lives, how to resolve conflicts. So now let's take a look at the level 1, the top one step of the strategy and tactic tree, the viable vision strategy and tactic tree, transformational strategy and tactic tree for a for-profit organization. Now, this, I just want to let you know that prior to Ellie's passing away in 2011, he did make some modifications to this step, and I actually made a few more modifications to it since then when I was teaching my strategy and tactic tree programs online. So the strategy, the goal of the organization that is for profit, is the organization is an ever-flourishing company. That means continuously and significantly increasing value to all stakeholders, employees, including suppliers, clients, and shareholders, while preventing harm to the world due to its actions or lack of action. Now, increasing value means stability on the green curve, which we saw on the core conflict, the root cause of all the symptoms that exist in organizations, at least for-profit organizations, is to achieve stability on the green curve, which is C, necessary condition or need C, and growth on the red curve, which is necessary condition or need B from the core conflict. Now, I just want to briefly point out what change I made to this from what Ellie wrote. Is he wrote employees, he didn't have including suppliers, but I realized that in his content of what he was talking about, that suppliers are also important because they are stakeholders in your system. You have to be able to effectively get the raw materials that you need to make your organization successful. And so it has to be a win-win for all. So I put it in parentheses here because Ellie intended employees to include suppliers, but not all organizations think that way. And I also added while preventing harm to the world due to its actions or lack of action, because I've seen too many organizations ignore this, doing damage to the environment or doing other things that cause harm that is actually going to prevent the organization from becoming ever flourishing. So now we look at the parallel assumptions, which are the linkage. If these assumptions in TOC are, we have to check to see if they are facts of life. And in this case for TSTT, transformational strategy and tactic tree, if these are each facts of life, which we have to verify, then they will guide us from what the strategy is that we've agreed upon to what the tactic must be. So remember, the strategy is the answer to the question what for, and the tactic is the answer to the question how. So let's look at the first parallel assumption. Realizing a viable vision, VV, a jump in profitability while increasing sales exponentially year after year, turns the company into an ever flourishing company. And these are notes in red that I added here when I teach this content. It's related to need B of the core conflict, which is more of a definition and explaining that if you want to become ever flourishing, what you need to do is achieve need B. And that is not defined specifically in the strategy, which is you have to exponentially increase your profits and sales year after year. Next, for a company to achieve the viable vision, its throughput, or sales, must grow and continue to grow much faster than operating expense. Throughput and operating expense, or T and OE, are terms from TOC, which were first described in the goal as well as in inventory, which later became investment, is the three operational measures of performance. Throughput is actually defined as sales minus the totally variable costs. And in my 0 to 60 session on finance and measurements, I describe these there. And there's other places you can go to learn about them, like the TOC-ICO dictionary, which is a wonderful resource. So what we have to do to achieve the viable vision, which is to grow exponentially, you got to have sales minus the totally variable cost growing much faster than cost, which operating expense is one type of cost and investment is another. So we have to, operating expense is what changes with the throughput level, or typically does. No, so not, it doesn't change with the throughput level. Operating expense would be like utilities, the cost of employees, etc. is you can see that the more you produce as a company, the more you grow exponentially, that your costs would have to go up. You might have to hire more employees. But in order to have more profitability, then what you have to do is have throughput going up faster than operating expense, because profit is equal to throughput minus operating expense. Next, parallel assumption, exhausting the company's resources and or taking too high risk severely endangers the chance of achieving the viable vision. And I can see here B, the second parallel assumption was related to need B, and the third one is related to need C. What resources are we talking about? Well, one of them is cash. Many organizations that are new fail within the first 5 years because of a cash flow problem, which can also happen to even companies that have been around a long time. But the resource that we are actually more concerned with, which cash is important, but is the people. Don't exhaust your people, especially management, or take too high risks, like opening a plant when you're not sure, for several $1-million investment when you're not sure that you can, use that effectively to achieve the financial performance for the organization. So given this strategy and these parallel assumptions, which we accept as facts, we must then conclude that the tactic is build a decisive competitive edge, DCE, and the capabilities to capitalize on it on big enough markets without exhausting the company's resources and without taking real risks. Notice that there are 5 components to this tactic. Build a decisive competitive edge. some of you may have read or are familiar with the best-selling book called Blue Ocean Strategy. Blue Ocean Strategy talks about how there's a part of the ocean that is a red ocean, which is competition where the companies are fighting to get the fish there, so there's blood in the water. That is not a decisive competitive edge, being in a red ocean. We want to find a blue ocean, which is where we can get the customers and have the growth for the organization that we're satisfying without fighting directly head-on our competitors. But I would say that a little bit differently is a decisive competitive edge is what you're doing that is significant. It's not it's satisfying the needs of the customers in a way that your competitors cannot easily do. And in the book Blue Ocean Strategy, they talk about coming up with some new vision, like a new way of doing things, like meeting a need of customers that is not known. And then actually in TOC we came to the realization that that's insightful, but why don't we do it in a way that is not as risky of doing something unknown, but knowing that there's a need of customers that currently exist that the competitors are not effectively meeting, such as being reliable in some industries or being rapid in response. And so that's a decisive competitive edge. First component, capabilities to capitalize on it. Just because you have a decisive competitive edge doesn't mean that your sales are going to grow exponentially. You have to be able to capitalize on it. And in some cases, organizations need to do effective marketing and sales to make that happen on big enough markets, so we're not fighting for some piece of a small pie, but a huge market that gives us plenty of room to grow to continue to have the exponential growth, and without exhausting the company's resources and without taking real risks. So notice that the first three components come from the growth side of the core conflict, and the last two components of this tactic come from the stability side of the core conflict. Now, what are the sufficiency assumptions? What must we, as Ellie used to refer to them, or somebody told him, is these are Confucius says, is common sense, which is commonly ignored, which, if ignored, we will not have sufficiency to achieve this top-level strategy and tactic of the organization, which is all about how to achieve this goal. So there are two here, and this was also a change I made to level 1 of the vision, strategy, and tactics trees, that I think this is a generic one for for-profit organizations. Since the constraint is management attention, the system must operate according to effective, robust, and long-lasting procedures with a clock. Now, this was a new verbalization that Ellie had put here for the sufficiency assumption when he modified level 1 of the retailer S&T tree. But because he came to this realization and needed to clarify that in a number of organizations, management attention is the constraint, is the factor most limiting its ability to achieve its goal. So we need to have effective, robust, and long-lasting procedures. And how do we do that? Which is what I put in red here, is we have to maintain stability. So to have procedures that are working in different situations effectively, and to be on POOGI, the process of ongoing improvement, or to apply the 5 focusing steps of TOC, which I described in some of the other sessions, like the intro to operations/production session, and I believe I also referred to them in some of the other 0 to 60 seminars I did, webinars for TOC ICO. Is if you look in organizations, whether they be small businesses or large businesses, Fortune 500 or 100 companies, is management is usually spread across a bunch of different initiatives, and many times what you'll see is that they don't have focus, as they're doing too many projects, and it's leading to what we call in TOC bad multitasking, and that causes problems, and it actually limits our ability to achieve our goal. And so TOC, the real power of TOC is focus. Focus includes 2 components, doing what should be done and not doing what should not be done. So What we need to do is have a focus in terms of what projects we need to do, what initiatives we need, which are important to achieving the goal of the organization as laid out in this top-level strategy and tactic pair here, or step, in the transformational strategy and tactic tree. So in TOC and different applications, and particularly as they were all combined into becoming a transformational strategy and tactic tree and a vision for how to achieve the strategy, the four components that I talked about here, the four viewpoints of change, Lieutenant's Cloud, the organizational strategy and tactic tree, and transformational strategy and tactic tree is guiding how to achieve that focus for the organization. And then this was the original version of this efficiency assumption, which is the way to achieve a decisive competitive edge is by meeting a significant need of the consumer to the extent that no significant competitor can, which is what provides the growth. And so on some of the publicly released strategy and tactics trees for viable vision organizations, for-profit organizations, this sufficiency assumption should be at this level, and for some it may make sense to move it to become a necessary assumption on the next level. So I'm not going to go into all those details here because I just wanted to provide some overview of transformational strategy and tactics trees. But what I would like to point out is level 1 just has one step, and then level 2 has at least 2 steps. And the tree goes down to at least level 5. In some cases it'll stop at level 4. That each, as we go down, writing the strategy and tactic tree, the transformational strategy and tactic tree, we're detailing all the logic and the strategies and tactics for how to achieve this vision or step that is presented here. And so levels 4 and 5 actually provide the implementation plan for how to do it. So now let's just move forward here. As you've seen this example, let's go back to the cloud. So how do we break this conflict of the viable vision organizations? What we did is, instead of doing D or D prime, conservative or risky actions, the injection or the solution to achieving A, B, and C is to build a decisive competitive edge and the capabilities to capitalize on it on big enough markets without exhausting the company's resources and without taking real risks. Notice that I highlighted in red here, without exhausting the company's resources, because that's why I pointed out here below what we saw as a sufficiency assumption on level 1 of the viable vision S&T trees is without exhausting management, which is commonly the constraint most limiting the ability of the organization to achieve more of the goal, which is what I wrote here, is that we've seen that often, that it's management. And I'm not really sure what the best verbalization is. Is it management attention or exhausting management? Is you could view it as attention is if I'm having to spread my attention across 10 different initiatives or 20 different initiatives and spending time on each of those, that is limiting our ability to achieve the goal of the organization. But also TOC is pointing out, why is it called the theory of constraints? Is we understand from experience that typically an organization has one or few constraints, and one is quite common, that is most limiting its ability to achieve its goal. And so that's the leverage point. That if you identify the constraint that is limiting the organization, whether it be the market, you don't have enough demand, or you have a machine or a department or a resource type like doctors or nurses or MRI machines or whatever it is. In the goal, they talk about the NCX-10 machines and the heat treat, the NCX-10 and heat treat machines. Then you have the leverage point. Is when it comes to improving an organization, you could try to improve it everywhere, but where are you going to have the most impact? On the factor that is most limiting its ability to achieve the goal. And that's what we've shown through experience of TOC, that for the production application of TOC, understanding that how to manage capacity and flow in production, whether it be production of products or services. There's still a flow in both of those, like delivering healthcare in hospitals or in private practice, is that focus has proven over years to achieve dramatic improvements in performance. For example, the first application of TOC that was developed was for production, which was described in the goal, some of the key components of the solution for production, which is called drum buffer, rope, and buffer management. Compared to some of the other applications for improving production like lean, when successfully implemented, the improvement in flow and due date performance and lead time, etc., those are all changed dramatically, even quality, which is not to denigrate lean. When I was working with Ellie as his apprentice, we wrote the paper Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, Production Concepts versus Production Applications. And so I actually read several of Ono's books, who was a key person in Toyota, which is the company that developed the lean, or Toyota production system, which has also been referred to as lean, is that we explained there why lean didn't achieve as great a results in other organizations outside of Toyota, and compared and contrasted the TOC and lean approaches to production, and actually gave a history of Ford's, Henry Ford Motor Company, what he did there, because Toyota based what they did to dramatically improve production, which they're actually the world's largest automaker now, is, and known for quality, though they've had some blips of late, is, and some issues, which we won't go into here, but that they were inspired by what Henry Ford did, which he wrote in a book he published in like 1921 or 23 or something like that, about what he did at Ford Motor Company, which was astounding. And also what happened in U.S. supermarkets, how they were replenishing inventory there was also inspiring to Toyota. And so what I wrote up here is, even the sky is not the limit. This is a quote from Ellie, except that I capitalized "not" and put 3 exclamation points, because I wanted to emphasize this, that what we can achieve may seem impossible to others, but what we have done in TOC, or what even other people have done, when they came up with a huge dream, a person or organization, which in Built to Last they talked about setting big, hairy, audacious goals, that's what led companies to become the gold medalists in their industry and have the exponential growth and stability. Is you got to set a huge dream and then have the tenacity to achieve it through your logic, through your intuition, through your will and discipline. It can be done, and that's what is so phenomenal, I think, about the book The Choice that Ellie wrote, is he talks about philosophy in terms of how to do that, that many people have been told they're crazy, like, you think you're going to, write a book that's going to sell millions of copies. Well, if I don't try, I'll never know, because the only proof of assumptions we make about reality, of the map of cause and effect that guides us in terms of how to be effective in our lives, in our organizations, will only prove true if we actually test it and be like a scientist, as Ellie described in The Choice, of you're building a prototype and you challenge your assumptions and you check, was your logic correct about what you assumed would happen if you did certain actions. So what can be achieved is beyond the sky, that you can fly, like soar, like Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and achieve something that in the story, in the book, they said couldn't be done. So level 1 of the transformational strategy and tactics trees, I just want to briefly describe what the format is here. So the strategy is the common objective A of the core conflict of the organization. They even include the necessary conditions of B and C from the evaporating cloud, the root cause of all the negative effects that are occurring in the organization. The parallel assumptions include one or more of the following: facts to lead us to conclude what the tactic must be. Must is underlined here, that if these parallel assumptions, if the assumptions are accepted as fact, then the unavoidable conclusion is this must be the tactic, that no other tactic will work in order to achieve the strategy or goal of the organization. We can also have one of the parallel assumptions and needs of the organization in the core conflict, like B and C. The assumption or assumptions challenged underlying the core conflict, which would be under the BD, CD prime, and or DD prime arrows. And you may also have a statement providing hope, which is leading to the direction of the solution. The tactic is the one statement of the injection that challenges one or more of the assumptions underlying the core conflict and how the organization intends to achieve its strategy/goal. I want to emphasize that this is particularly important on level 1, to write the tactic in one statement, one sentence, which is if you came up with an injection to challenge 2 assumptions under the BD, CD prime, and DD prime arrows, then you need to combine that into one verbalization. In the lower levels of the S&T tree, it's perfectly acceptable to write more than one tactic there, and actually makes sense to divide them into separate tactics. But at level 1, this is the focus of the organization. It should be just one statement of the how we're going to achieve the strategy or goal of the organization. The sufficiency assumptions are, because you can have more than one, commonly about the power of focus, such as the constraint. It's like we need to focus on whatever the constraint is for the organization, the factor most limiting the ability of the organization to achieve the goal, or the person, if you were writing it as S&T tree for a person. Now, I'd like to share with you another example of a transformational strategy and tactic tree level 1. This is the top of the strategy and tactics trees, generic strategy and tactics trees for hospitals, that was written by Dr. Antoine Van Gelder and I. And he is he's a doctor from South Africa who was the first person to implement TOC in hospitals, in private and public hospitals in South Africa. So Ellie put us together to move forward, because he knew I had a passion for improving health and health care, to write this and put it in the public domain, which we have, at least level 3 so far. The hospital is more and more adept at providing strategy, at providing excellent health care, while providing a rewarding work environment for healthcare providers, staff, and management, and significantly improving financial performance. So see here, the way we wrote the strategy was actually focusing on A, B, and C, or in other words, think about the satisfying the market, satisfying employees, and making money. All 3 of them are here, but worded in a way that specifically makes sense for hospitals. And healthcare is defined as, in order of importance, patient outcomes, meaning did they get healthy, how quickly, were they cured, patient safety, which is about reducing errors and infections, effective treatment times, effective meaning not necessarily the shortest, because we don't want to jeopardize outcomes by shortening times, and patient satisfaction. Parallel assumptions, this has to do with the core conflict, the first one, actions taken or breaking it, understanding how to break it. Actions taken to improve the quality of healthcare can jeopardize financial performance, while actions taken to not jeopardize or to improve financial performance can hurt quality. The quality and costs are needs B and C from the core conflict of hospitals and even other healthcare institutions, that we have to find a way to achieve both quality and good financial performance. Exhausting the hospital's resources and or taking too high risks severely endangers the chance of reaching the strategy, which is typically the constraint, or can be the constraint. In some hospitals, when we go in, we'll find beds constraint or nurses or whatever it is. The constraint can vary, but the way we design and utilize the transformational strategy and tactics trees is we want to keep control over the constraint and make sure it doesn't move to a place that we don't want it to be. When industry applications are appropriately adapted and effectively focused based on patient centricity in a hospital, its performance, and I wanted to emphasize here, there's 3 components of performance: the level of health care, rewarding work environment, and financials, improves significantly through more effective usage of the current resources available. And this is an example of a statement providing hope. The tactic then must be, assuming this strategy is accepted and these parallel assumptions are actually facts of life for a hospital, the hospital successfully changes its mode of operation through effective adaptation of industry applications and other knowledge applied without exhausting its resources and without taking real risk. So then the sufficiency assumption that we put here is the way to achieve dramatic improvements is based on knowing where and how to successfully focus efforts. And there have been, Antoine and I have done a webinar for TOC-ICO and put in the public domain this strategy and tactic tree to level 3 on the left side, and in the future we'll be releasing it to level 5 and providing guidance on helping or giving the knowledge to people in hospitals to be able to effectively achieve this strategy. So that's something that we'll be doing in the future by providing programs, educational programs, or book or other materials. So this I wanted to show you an example of level 1 of a transformational strategy and tactic tree for a service organization for hospitals. So there is work being done in services with respect to TSTTs. This is level 1 of the Goldrett Group viable vision, which is a strategy as TOC becomes the main way of managing organizations. Which actually, Ellie wrote this in 2002. That's when he took the strategy and tactic tree off the shelf. And actually, he told me the story that it took him 6 weeks to write this strategy and tactic tree to figure out what needed to be done to make Goldrett Group more effective in achieving its goal. And that what ended up happening was levels 1 and 2 were the only things that remained moving forward in the organization. And I know that Goldrett Group has this tree written to level 5 and even probably has content for level 6 as well in terms of a list of actions, and has been using this to guide their efforts. Parallel assumptions are the switch from conventional to the TOC way is composed of many paradigm shifts, and institutionalizing even a single paradigm shift is not easy. So one of the paradigm shifts in TOC, one of the first was in operations or production, is choke the release of raw materials into the plant. And people will be like, are you crazy? Like, we have to keep pushing in there because we need high efficiencies everywhere. We need to utilize these machines and these people 100%. Not realizing that that actually hurts their performance, that our goal should not be high local efficiencies, but the efficiency of the constraint if we have a bottleneck in production or a capacity-constrained resource. So there are many paradigm shifts that are happening in TOC, and that has made it difficult sometimes for people to be able to motivate others to do it or even successfully implement it, because they have to overcome the resistance to huge change in how things are done in some cases. The common sense logic of TOC and the magnitude of results it brings makes TOC the perfect candidate for becoming the main way. We've seen this for applications in operations or production, distribution, supply chain, project management, marketing and sales. I mean, there's many applications of TOC, and for years now, Goldrett Group and other organizations, I assume as well, because I don't know what everybody's doing, have been focusing on doing cross-functional synchronized implementations of several TOC applications, and there are huge, dramatic, quick results that happen. And so that's why Ellie had written TOC becomes the main way. But that's not to say that it is the only way, but it is the focusing mechanism, the tool that guides Lean and Six Sigma and other TQM, whatever you want to call it, to work together effectively to achieve the focus effectively on achieving the strategy or goal of the organization. So you can see in some of the strategy and tactic trees that Ellie wrote, or even ones that I'm writing, that you have in there mentioned things like Lean and Six Sigma or other initiatives, things that do work well. But understanding, like for example with Lean or Six Sigma, that there are certain assumptions or issues with respect to how they're done that are actually blocking them from having even more prominent results. And so we've seen from experience that when TOC was utilized as the focusing mechanism for Lean and Six Sigma, that the most dramatic results were achieved in organizations. So then the tactic must be build what is necessary and sufficient to ensure TOC becomes the main way of managing organizations. For TOC to become the main way, we do not need to wait until most organizations fully implement it. It is enough to reach that stage that most professionals and managers say that TOC should be implemented. And so he actually had written 5 steps on level 2 of this strategy and tactic tree, when he wrote it back in 2002, and there he pointed out that we needed to have gold-right schools to provide education to people in various levels. Gold-right marketing group, which provides marketing and the sale of videos and books and other materials that are ways that people can educate themselves on their own for less money than going to a school or even doing online classes from an institution that teaches TOC, and Gold-right Consulting. And since then, Gold-right Research Labs was added, and they do have software organizations that Inherent Simplicity wrote software for implementing effectively the production solutions of TOC, etc. So that's what's been guiding Gold-right Group, and now they're doing quite well and continuing to move forward on their green and red curves. So I just want to briefly give you a structural description of the transformational strategy and tactics trees for viable vision. Level 1 is the same for the ones that Ellie released in the public domain, which are the ones that Gold-right Consulting has been using in implementations in various countries, especially India, and there's quite a few going on in the U.S. and some other countries. The level 1 is the same for the generic trees, or should be pretty much the same. Level 2, initially it was exactly the same. Level 2 is divided into base growth and enhanced growth for all but the pay-per-click strategy and tactic tree. So, for example, two of the strategy and tactics trees have base growth as being reliable to meeting your commitments, like due dates, and then being more rapid in it for higher money, either paid up front or as bonuses. The project's S&T tree, transformational strategy and tactic tree, has that, as does the RRR, reliable rapid response strategy and tactic tree. Have the ways in which you're going to achieve growth. First, become reliable. Do the left side of the tree. Do everything needed to make sure you can meet your due date performance 99% of the time, or 95% plus if it's projects. And then once that's done and it's working well, then you move to enhanced growth. Is you can do projects or products for more quickly and get additional money for doing that. Level 3 of the strategy and tactics trees for viable visions consists of steps that are either build, capitalize, or sustain, which is was actually a sufficiency assumption in the strategy and tactics tree. Is you have to build a decisive competitive edge, capitalize on it, and sustain it in order to maintain growth and stability, which is directly related to the tactic that was written in level 1. And then level 4 and 5 provide the detailed implementation plan. So for every level 4 step, you don't have to have a level 5 written, but whenever you're writing a step on the next level where you're detailing it, it has to be at least 2 steps that you're dividing it into. And so then level 4 and 5, the lowest steps on the strategy and tactic tree, the TSCT, become the implementation plan which is actually developed in using critical chain project management software like the one from Realization, which is a company that's done a great job implementing the project solution and supporting Gold-right Group on implementing on the viable vision implementations. Is one type of assumption that is not detailed in the strategy and tactic tree. For transformational strategy and tactic tree is sequence assumptions. So we now deal with sequence by creating the project plan using the steps from level 4 and 5. Now, I'm going to briefly mention the other type, the second type of strategy and tactic tree, which is called an organizational strategy and tactic tree. And I chose to use the symbol, the Asian symbol for harmony, or wa in Japan it's called, which is the focus of the organizational strategy and tactic tree. Is the different levels of the tree represent the different levels of the organization in terms of the pyramid, and each step corresponds to a resource type to guide them in terms of the strategy and tactics for what they need to do. And what we need to do is use the organizational strategy and tactics tree in combination with the transformational strategy and tactic tree. But I would just like to point out, and the point that why I use wa and harmony there, is because the organizational strategy and tactic tree, in combination with the transformational strategy and tactic tree, helps us achieve harmony or win-win for all in the organization, or even organizations in the supply chain. Is not as much work has been done yet on developing this. There are a few organizational strategy and tactic trees that have been developed, but I have not been able to find any in the public domain that have been put out there yet. And just like the transformational strategy and tactics trees, we started using them. Ellie brought it off the shelf in 2002. It took time to get experience with that, and then teaching others how to write and utilize them to start putting more materials in the public domain with respect to them. So here's just a brief summary. I don't have an example to show you of this, but this is something that you can check back with TOC-ICO or other organizations to see if what's been done with respect to organizational strategy and tactics trees. These are focused on eliminating the 5 engines of disharmony, which Ellie actually wrote. This is his words exactly, which I put in my chapter of the Theory of Constraints Handbook, which is what we jokingly refer to as the Bible for TOC, which gave the latest knowledge, which was published in 2010 with over 40 of the world's top TOC experts writing new content about the exponential growth in knowledge and experience that had been developed in TOC. And that book was completed from start to end in about a year, and it's over 1,200 pages long. So that was a major project, and kudos to Jim Cox, Dr. Jim Cox, and John Schleier for doing a great job as co-editors of it and working with all of us to make it happen. So what Ellie wrote in a letter, which he explains in his, which was explained in the content that was delivered at the TOC-ICO conference in New York in 2011, which unfortunately he passed away right before it, but he worked to have all the slides and content developed to share his latest knowledge and his 2-day upgrade, so he talks about it there. So I'll just briefly read them here, and I'm not going to spend time discussing them. That you can learn more about these in seeing his presentation or other materials that have been developed since then. The 5 engines of disharmony in organizations are: 1, many people don't really know, cannot clearly verbalize how what they are doing is essential to the organization. Would you be motivated if you were in that position? 2, most people don't really know what many of their colleagues are doing is essential, or at least contributes to the organization. Would you be collaborative if you were in that position? 3, people are operating under conflicts. Look at the evaporating clouds, and we have to find a way to break them to achieve win-win. 4, many people are required to also do tasks for which the reason no longer exists. There are some actions or rules that were put in the organization that made sense when technology was ancient compared to now, or for whatsoever reason, and people's intuition is always strong enough to feel it, but not always strong enough to convincingly explain it to their superiors, to say, look, this rule that you put in place is actually blocking us from doing, or this task that we're doing doesn't need to be done anymore because it's not serving any important purpose to enable us to achieve our goal or high-level strategy. And 5, gaps between responsibility and authority. You, like any other manager, know firsthand how frustrating it is to have something you're responsible for accomplishing, but you do not have the authority for some of the actions that must be taken. So it's frustrating to be given responsibility, for those to be misaligned, that you're given responsibility for achieving performance on some measure, but you don't have authority to take actions to actually drive improvements on that performance measure. And Ellie did present these at the TOC-ICO International Conference in Tokyo, and that's when he first spoke about the fact that there are several types of strategy and tactics trees. We have the transformational, the organizational, and also content or knowledge strategy and tactics tree. Now, the 4th component that I said I was going to talk about of the necessary and sufficient components for achieving effectively the strategy or goal of the organization is the lieutenant's cloud. And I have to say, since December 30th, I have had major issues with lieutenant's clouds, that I had a major fire happen where my 4-year-old, Sloaney Bio, which was a real workhorse, died. I heard this awful clicking sound when I woke up that morning and turned on the computer. I was like, I know what that means. And I had been postponing getting a new computer because I didn't want to transfer all my software and move to a new platform, etc., etc. But I was like, now I have no choice. And since then, I've been tortured with putting out a lot of fires, which were caused in part by other organizations like the shippers and suppliers, etc. And my problems still aren't solved, but I'm getting closer. So here's the issue: as a fire happens, a major fire, is the lieutenant able to put out the fire to deal with it? When I feel frustrated, like yesterday, I had purchased 2 new computers, one on December 30th, which actually, of all days, for any of you who follow NFL, the football, American football, on Super Bowl Sunday, that computer died. It was brand new. And the hard drive died that day, and I was like, right before the Super Bowl started, which I was getting ready to watch, and I was like, I can't even think about this. That I just, I didn't even finish setting everything up and utilizing everything, and now I know there's a very good chance that this hard drive is dead. And I did find out that it actually had to be replaced, so that hard drive had a life of about 33 days, which made me really happy. Then I ordered a new computer from Amazon, because I said, well, this one isn't really working for me, and it was a slim book, and I realized I really wanted to stick with Sony Bio because I was happy with them, but I wanted Windows 7, which is hard to get now, and because of all the software I use, and it was something that was intuitively easy for me to use. And it's not to say Windows 8 isn't good, but I don't like how Microsoft releases things with a bunch of bugs in it, that I was tortured enough by Vista that I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not moving to Windows 8 until it's time. So I actually had to drive down last night from northern Arizona because I realized that my repaired 33-day-old computer and my new Vio were sitting in a shipping facility in Phoenix, and they were not able to do anything to help me get it to where I was in northern Arizona, which I've been trying to do for 8 days, that I was really afraid, based on what they said, that they were going to ship it back to the supplier, and I was like, geez, I had to go through the process of fixing my old computer because I owned 3 computers and not one of them was working because of whatsoever reason at various times, because I didn't have it in my hands or whatever, that I literally had to drive down to Phoenix to come and get my computers, which fortunately, thank the gods, were still there, but one of them was getting ready to be shipped back to the repair facility, that I had to deal with the lieutenants. And I was like, they didn't want to give me the one that was going to be shipped back to the repair facility, which had already just come from, even though I was standing there with my ID saying, please give me my computer. And I told them on the phone, when I had escalated it to many different levels, I don't want it sent back, but what do I have to do? Like, you're a shipping company. Why can't you ship it to where I am? Which I've been trying to do because I unexpectedly changed. I had to go from Phoenix to northern Arizona, and had been wasting countless hours of my time trying to deal with all these different companies, not just one point of contact to solve this. Well, I'd love to see a situation where the lieutenants have the ability to put out the fire effectively, that they have to be empowered to do that. And so many years ago in the TOC Management Skills Workshop, I think was where it was developed, was an understanding of what is the lieutenant's cloud. How do we stop our organizations from having to put out so many fires? Let's actually not be in firefighting mode, which wastes a lot of time and effort and really upsets your customers when they are part of the fire. And like the Carnival Cruise Line ship that was disabled for 5 days in, I think it was the Gulf of Mexico, and all the problems that occurred there in recent history, is also we want to put in place a mechanism to prevent the fires from happening in the first place. So we can, instead of being firefighters, we can focus on actually focusing our time on doing the strategies and tactics peacefully and calmly and focus to achieve the strategy and goal of the organization. So the lieutenant's cloud is the following. What is the lowest common objective both needs are trying to satisfy? So you verbalize in A, the lowest common objective that we're trying to satisfy in the organization with respect to the fire that has arisen. B is what is the need of the system being jeopardized by the fire, which is the lieutenant's responsibility. So they were jeopardizing my satisfaction and wasting my valuable time to have a computer to do my work. It was like, that's my office. I don't have to live in a specific place, but I need to have a functioning computer that has all my software and everything on it that's working for me, especially since I'm going to start traveling internationally, or globally again, rather. What is the need of, so then how do we do that? In order to achieve the need of the system being jeopardized by the fire, the action that we want to take is that the lieutenant breaks the rule, checks if by doing so the corresponding need will be met. So they actually, fortunately, someone else last night came to me and said, just give her the computer that was working in the shipper's office. It was like, she's here, just give it to her, because they were making me wait there while they were calling to say, is it okay that this was already scheduled to be reshipped back to the repair facility, is it okay if we give it to the customer who's standing right here? So, on the other side, what is the need of the system that is protected by the rule? What's the reason for the rule? So it's an understanding is the rule was put in place for a reason, and so we want to understand that. We don't want to jeopardize that, but we have to understand that in some specific situations it makes sense to break the rule because the damage of not breaking the rule can be so huge, especially nowadays with the internet and the way news is being shared globally, and with social networking, with Facebook, LinkedIn, and things. Word of mouth is so powerful for the success or failure of an organization. And I remember years ago when I was a business school professor teaching operations management, I used to talk about examples of and shared information on quality and customer satisfaction, and said, you know, back then, some of the statistics I saw said that people who have good stories, something good that happened with an organization, on average tell one person, when those who've been burned by the company tell 9 on average. I'm sure that those statistics are way off now because so many people can find out, like we're seeing with Yahoo News or other places, when something goes wrong, it's getting spread to how many people, and becomes, as they call it, viral. And I got this, the source that I went to find this exact verbalizations here was the TOCICO dictionary. So I cite that here. And it has more of a description there, which is a great resource. So to summarize, I covered today, to some extent, most of my time was on the transformational strategy and tactic tree, which is the one we know the best and the one that has more and more information that's been going out into the public domain, such as my chapter in the TOC handbook, which is also available for individual purchase through the Kendall store or McGraw-Hill. Professional, the organizational strategy and tactic tree, which is not in the public domain yet to any degree, but will have more work and hopefully information shared at TOCICO international conferences or white papers with the new process there, the 4 viewpoints of change. That key content has been presented in the past 2 years, and we'll see more of that coming out, I'm sure, in terms of white papers and other presentations. And the Lieutenant Cloud has been around for quite a while, but it's important to realize that, hey, that's one of the 4 key components of this, in that the shipper should hopefully learn, because I'm going to write a letter documenting exactly what happened with both of my computers going through the same shipper and all the miscommunications, rules that were preventing satisfying the customer, etc., that in my mind explain why this organization is not as successful as they could be and why I'm really thinking about not using them ever again. So, where do I suggest you go to learn more about these ideas, what I presented here in terms of content? I mentioned several times the book The Choice that Ellie wrote with his daughter, who is a PhD in organizational psychology, Efrat Goldratt Ashlag, and it's a wonderful book which has a business focus, but it also presents an organizational philosophy of life with stories about business in there. So some people are turned off if they're not business people to some of that content, but if you can get past that, there's some great ideas in there about how to achieve a meaningful life, a full life, a magical life, to create the pot of gold that you'd like to achieve in your life or in your organization. The Theory of Constraints Handbook, which I also mentioned, I forget how many chapters there are in there, over 40 authors of the top TOC people in the world. Ellie actually wrote the first chapter of that book, which he provides, several years ago, what his view of TOC was, which is about focus. It's a great chapter. Ellie did a Gold Rat Satellite program in 1999, Session on Strategy, which also has some great content, which is available on the TOC-goldrat.com website, which is the Gold Rat Marketing Group website. Ellie's 2-day upgrade, which he wasn't able to deliver, which was delivered for him at the TOC ICO International Conference by Lisa Scheinkoff. It's great content on strategy and how to become an ever-flourishing company. Also, my organization, Illuminatopia.com, which I formed with some other wonderful people, and our focus is on win-win for all. We have a transformational strategy and tactic tree webcast program, my final program that I'm delivering starting a month from today, which is 5 sessions, 3 hours each, every other week, which will be recorded and for sale after that. And also I'm publishing this year 2 books on TOC. One is My Year with Dr. Ellie Goldratt, which I'm hoping to publish March 31st, assuming no more major Murphy strikes, like all the computer problems I've had for a month and a half now, and DVDs and online videos to be released this year of the content regarding the transformational strategy and tactic trees. And I'm targeting June for the release of my transformational strategy and tactic tree book and the DVD online video access to that program. And in the future, Illuminatopia will offer that program again, but I won't be the one facilitating it, as I've already delivered it as an online program several times, and now I'm ready to move on to new content. I got all the insights I needed to be able to effectively teach it in a book format, as opposed to where you can have wonderful interactions online or in person when you're mentoring people to write transformational strategy and tactics trees. We also have materials currently available in our guest and member portals, and we'll be adding to those in the future, because my focus for the past few years has been on writing these books and developing the strategy and tactic tree for Illuminatopia, and carefully focusing on building all the blocks to move it forward, understanding that we were dealing with some serious interactive constraints for the organization, and I was a bottleneck, and I had to best utilize my time to do that, given everything else that was happening in my life as well, which will be shared in other future writings. And finally, other TOCIC materials. TOCICO is a great resource. I highly recommend the conferences 2012, and I haven't seen all the program for 2013 yet, but I'm sure there will be some wonderful content delivered by some of the top experts of TOC in the world on strategy. And there's some past conference recordings and slides that have been developed, and I'm sure also webinars. I've done a number of webinars, as have other people, on strategy and other topics for TOCICO, which are free to members. So go back to that list and see who's presented and what content is there at the titles where you can learn from TOCICO. And it's wonderful how they're supporting the knowledge development through the Gold Rat Foundation and white paper process and things, the efforts that they're doing to get the knowledge developed and shared through their conferences, their webinars, and other ways like the white papers, etc., to so that we can all win. Because that's what Ellie's vision was, which I was completely aligned with, is you put the material in the public domain. Doesn't mean it has to be free of charge, but you try to charge a rate based on value, or make, you can make exceptions, like through doing pro bono work or sliding scale pricing or scholarships, but put the material in various prices available in the domain. Some of it can be free. As soon as you know when you release it, it's not going to cause huge damage. So that's what my vision is as well, and here's a little bit about me and Illuminatopia. It's been a pleasure being here, and I hope to see you at the TOCICO International Conference in Germany, but if you can't be there, I certainly hope that you will continue to access TOCICO for resources to continue to upgrade your knowledge about how to bring the light back to the world, to find a way to have utopia for all of us, an ideal society of individuals, organizations, and for animals and the environment, etc. Because the only way that I believe we can do that is if we cooperate and we focus on collaborating to make this happen. So feel free to contact me if there's some way that Illuminatopia can support, or if you're interested in forming a win-win partnership with us. That's what we want to do, and I have been, and people in my organization have been supporting TOCICO through donating our time, and because we think this is a great organization that is very important to moving forward TOC and honoring Ellie's legacy. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll just turn it over to Jessica now. I know we have a few minutes left. If there's any questions.
Yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them into the question panel, or send them into the chat area, or if you want to ask your question directly to Dr. Ferguson, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll open up your microphone. And Lisa, thank you very much for your presentation today. It was very informative, and can't thank you enough for all your time that you've been giving us. So
yes, thank you. I'm happy to do it. I've been part of TOCICO since the beginning, and it's wonderful what's been achieved, and what I can see is happening in the future is great.
Exactly. And yeah, with the conference this year, we're actually running basic and advanced knowledge workshops. So it'll be good for both, new attendees that have never been before, and for people that have gone every single year since the beginning. So we hope that.
Yeah, which is wonderful for the newcomers, just like I decided to do this 0 to 60 series because I was inspired by Ellie Stregenheim giving one for experts. I said, hey, we need some for newbies. And I'm actually going to be presenting the basics session on finance and measures in Germany. So I was tapped for that one.
Very good. I don't see any questions that have come in, so I guess we'll go ahead and end it for today. So thank you again, Lisa, for your time, and thank you to everybody who has attended today. And you can find this webinar, if you missed the beginning or anything, you can find it up on the recorded webinars on the TOCIC website. And as Lisa mentioned, it is free for members. So thank you all, and have a good day.
Thank you.